This is how they found 2 miles down that there were all of these structures that each one covering 62 acres.
For almost half a century, Linda Moulton Howe has been collecting the secrets other people were ordered to keep, and the darkest file in her archive is labeled Antarctica.
Antarctica is locked off more than the Pentagon. We kind of can study it from afar.
Navy men wrote to her, flight engineers called her. Witnesses at the end of their lives handed her accounts they had buried for 20 years, and she checked every record before she said a word. Now, in her 80s, she is standing at podiums and saying out loud what those men claim is waiting beneath the ice, so stay to the end. Because the reason she finally chose to speak is the part nobody sees coming. The journalist. To understand why Brian chose her, of all the reporters in the world, you need to understand who this woman actually is. Linda Moulton Howe is not an anonymous voice on the internet. She is an American investigative journalist and documentary producer who earned a regional Emmy Award for her 1980 documentary, A Strange Harvest, a film that examined the wave of unexplained cattle mutilations reported across the American West. That film made her famous in one very specific world. It marked her as a reporter, willing to take strange testimony seriously, to check the records behind it, and to put her own name on the result. Now think about what that reputation does over time. If you are a person sitting on a story you were ordered to bury, you do not call a newspaper that will laugh at you. You call the one journalist who has spent decades listening to people exactly like you, and they did call. Through the 80s and 90s, and then through her website Earth Files, which she launched in 1999, Howe built an enormous archive of first-hand accounts, military witnesses, radar operators, government scientists. People who reached retirement looked back at their careers and decided that one memory could not be allowed to die with them. Her critics say she is too willing to believe. Her defenders say she is one of the only reporters who ever bothered to listen. Both sides agree on one thing. When a whistleblower wants to talk about the unexplained, the road usually leads to Linda Moulton Howe, which is exactly why, on that January morning, an email from a stranger was waiting in her inbox, and why nothing about her Antarctica files would ever be the same after she opened it. The letter. Picture her at her desk in Albuquerque, scanning a full inbox the way she had every morning for years. She had read thousands of letters by then, and most of them went nowhere. But according to her own published reports on Earth Files, this one made her stop. The sender identified himself as a retired United States Navy petty officer, first class, a flight engineer who had served 20 years before retiring in 1997. To protect his identity, she has only ever referred to him by his first name, Brian. Brian wrote that he had spent years of his career flying with Antarctic Development Squadron 6, the Navy unit known as VXE-6, the squadron that operated ski-equipped LC-130 aircraft across the frozen continent. His deployments, he said, ran from 1983 to 1997, supply runs, science support, medical evacuations, the unglamorous flying that kept remote research stations alive through conditions that can kill an exposed human being in minutes. And in that email, by his own account, he finally said the thing he had been holding back for almost 2 decades. He told Howe that he had witnessed events on the ice that he and his crew were instructed never to discuss. He wrote that he had wanted to contact her for a long time. Now, retired and getting older, he had decided the story mattered more than the order. Here is the thing. Anyone can write an email. Anyone can claim a service record. So, she did what she had always done. She corresponded with him, interviewed him at length, and pressed him for the kind of operational detail that is very hard to fake. Squadron structure, aircraft, flight routes, the daily texture of life at McMurdo, and the camps deep in the interior. By her account, the details held together, and Brian even marked up maps of Antarctica for her, pinpointing the locations where he claimed the strange events took place. She published his letter and her interviews with him, and years later, in 2020, she rebroadcast the story on her Earth Files YouTube channel, where she says new viewers came forward in the comments claiming their own supporting experiences. Some described relatives who had served on the ice and hinted at things they would never explain. One anonymous letter had quietly become a thread that other people kept pulling. If you are already feeling that cold pull of curiosity, this is the moment to hit like and subscribe, because stories like this one are exactly what this channel exists to bring you, and what Brian claimed to have seen out there is where everything turns strange. The no-fly zone. So, what exactly did this veteran flight engineer say he witnessed? According to the testimony Howe published, it started in the air. Brian claimed that on multiple occasions during his years with VXE-6, he and other crew members observed silver, disc-shaped objects moving above the Transantarctic Mountains, the immense range that divides east and west, Antarctica. These were not vague lights on a horizon, as he described them. They were structured craft, moving in ways that no aircraft in the American inventory could match, over one of the most remote flight corridors on Earth. And here is the detail that has kept researchers arguing ever since. Brian claimed there was an area near the South Pole that air crews were ordered to avoid, a restricted zone, treated as off-limits even to the military crews who flew everything, everywhere, in every kind of weather. The crews simply knew it as an area you did not enter, he said, and questions about it were not welcome. Then came the flight he could not explain away. During one medical evacuation mission, he told Howe, weather and circumstances forced his aircraft to cross directly over that forbidden ground. And looking down from the flight deck, the crew saw something that should not exist. A massive opening in the ice, a huge hole descending into darkness, sitting in the middle of that restricted zone, miles from the South Pole station. Ice does not do that on its own, not like this. Crevasses tear the surface in jagged lines, melt channels wander. But what Brian described was different. A defined opening in a region where nothing should be warm enough or active enough to keep such a thing from sealing shut. And in his account, the reaction afterward told the crew everything. There were no explanations offered. There was only the clear understanding that what they had seen was not to be discussed, not logged in stories, not repeated at the bar, not mentioned again. Now think about that world for a second. Military aviation runs on debriefs, checklists, and paperwork. Every anomaly gets a report. So, when a crew comes back from a flight, and the one thing everybody saw is the one thing nobody writes down, that absence is louder than any document could ever be. But the hole in the ice was only what Brian saw from the air. What he claimed happened on the ground, at a camp near the edge of the map, is the part that people cannot stop repeating. The missing scientists. In his account, published by Howe, there was an incident involving a group of scientists working at a remote field camp in the direction of Marie Byrd Land, one of the emptiest and least explored regions on the planet. The scientists went silent, not for hours, not for a day. For roughly 2 weeks, contact was lost, and the situation was treated with an urgency that went beyond a normal search operation. Then, according to his testimony, they were found. And this is the part that stayed with him. Brian claimed that when the missing scientists came back, they were not celebrating survivors, telling rescue stories. He described men who seemed hollowed out by whatever those 2 weeks had held. In his telling, they sat withdrawn on the flight out, eyes down, frightened, answering nothing, wrapped in a silence that felt heavier than the engines around them. He said they were flown off the continent, and that everyone involved understood the subject was closed. No debrief shared with the crews, no explanation. Just an empty space in the record where 2 weeks of human experience should have been. Ask yourself what could do that to a team of working scientists. These were not tourists. They were professionals chosen for one of the harshest postings on Earth. People trained to document everything they encountered, because documentation is the entire point of being there. In Brian's account, whatever happened during those 2 weeks was powerful enough to turn men whose careers were built on describing the world into men who refused to describe anything at all. Brian went further still. He told Howe he had come to believe that Antarctica hosted activity involving intelligences that were not human, and that elements of the government knew far more about it than they would ever admit. That is his claim, and it is important to be honest here. It is testimony, not proof. No physical evidence has ever been produced. His identity has never been publicly verified beyond Howe's own checks. Skeptics argue that an anonymous account, however detailed, can never carry the weight of a documented discovery. And yet, the story refuses to die. Because when people hear it, they remember that Antarctica already has a strange history with the American military. A history that is fully documented, sitting in the open, and still not entirely explained. The frozen continent. Antarctica was first sighted in 1820 by a Russian expedition, And for more than a century afterward, it remained the most hostile blank space on the map. A continent half again the size of the United States, buried under ice that in places runs miles deep, surrounded by the most violent seas on Earth. Nobody owned it. Almost nobody could survive it. For generations, it was less a place than a rumor at the bottom of every map. Then, in the southern summer of 1946 and 1947, the United States Navy did something extraordinary. It launched Operation High Jump, the largest expedition ever sent to Antarctica, before or since. 13 ships, dozens of aircraft, roughly 4,700 men, under the overall direction of the most famous polar explorer alive, Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd. Here is the thing about High Jump. The official purpose was straightforward: train personnel and test equipment in extreme cold, expand American experience in polar operations, and photograph and map as much of the coastline as possible in the opening years of the Cold War. And the expedition did exactly that, capturing tens of thousands of aerial photographs of terrain no human had ever recorded. The mission also paid a price. In December of 1946, a Navy PBM Mariner flying boat known as George I crashed on Thurston Island in a whiteout, killing 3 of the 9 men aboard. Even the best trained crews the world could send were dying on that continent, and everybody involved knew it. But High Jump left behind loose threads that people have tugged at for almost 80 years. The operation was enormous for a training mission, organized with striking speed, and it wrapped up earlier than originally planned. In the decades since, an entire mythology has grown up around it, with claims of secret encounters and hidden discoveries. Historians who have studied the mission say the record supports a far more ordinary explanation: a Cold War show of strength cut short by brutal conditions, and no document has ever surfaced proving anything stranger. Now, think about what happened next. In 1959, 12 nations signed the Antarctic Treaty, setting the continent aside for peaceful scientific use and banning military activity. On paper, Antarctica became the most transparent place on Earth. In practice, it remains a continent where access is controlled by governments and logistics, where vast regions have never felt a human footstep, and where the public sees only what expeditions choose to publish. That is the backdrop Brian's testimony landed against. And it left Linda Moulton Howe holding a choice that would define the last chapter of her career: keep the file closed or stand up in public and say out loud what was in it, what Linda claims. She chose to stand up. Over the past decade, at lecture podiums in front of packed rooms, in interviews, and in her own Earth Files broadcasts, Howe has done the thing the title of this video promises. She has stopped holding the Antarctica material quietly in her files and started saying, publicly and on the record, what her sources have told her. Watch any of those lectures and you can see the weight of the decision on her, a reporter in her later years choosing to spend her remaining credibility on the story she could not put down. She has said that multiple sources, over many years, have described to her the presence of enormous anomalies beneath the Antarctic ice. She has spoken about testimony describing structured, geometric forms deep under the surface, things her sources insisted were not natural rock and not natural ice. She has publicly raised the claim, based on what she says insiders told her, that some of what lies down there could be far older than the ice above it, dating back more than 10,000 years, to an era when parts of Antarctica may have been dramatically different from the frozen desert we know today. And she has said something simpler and, in a way, heavier. She has argued that governments know more about the deep ice than they share with the public, and that the pattern she has seen across decades of interviews, the classifications, the confiscated data, the careers quietly redirected, all points in one direction, towards secrecy. Here is the other side of the ledger, and honesty demands it. Mainstream science has mapped huge areas beneath the Antarctic ice using radar and satellite surveys, and that work is published openly. It has revealed genuine wonders: the Gamburtsev Mountains, an entire alpine range completely entombed under the East Antarctic ice sheet; Lake Vostok, a body of liquid water sealed beneath more than 2 miles of ice for millions of years; ancient river valleys carved when the continent was green and alive. But in all of that published data, there are no verified structures, no confirmed ruins, no recovered technology. So, you are left with a clean, uncomfortable choice. Either witnesses spent decades independently bringing pieces of the same story to the same journalist, or somewhere under those miles of ice, something genuinely unexplained is waiting. Howe believes the witnesses. She has spent years saying, in effect, that the men who contacted her had nothing to gain, careers to protect, and reputations to lose, and that people do not carry a burden quietly for 20 years, only to hand it, unpaid and unrewarded, to a journalist at the end of their lives. Her critics answer that sincerity is not evidence, and that memory is a fragile instrument. But while that argument goes on in public, something quieter has been happening to the men inside her files. One by one, they are running out of time. The record survives. Here is the part of this story that stays with you after the screen goes dark. Linda Moulton Howe is now in her 80s. The witnesses who shaped this story were, in many cases, already deep into retirement when they contacted her. Some have since gone silent. Time is doing what time always does, and first-hand memory of the strangest corners of the 20th century is disappearing year by year. Now think about what that means for a story built entirely on testimony. Howe has said openly that this is why she keeps publishing, keeps lecturing, keeps returning to files that are decades old. In her view, the testimony itself is the treasure. If the people who lived these events die without their accounts being preserved, then whatever truth sits behind their stories, ordinary or extraordinary, is lost forever. Her answer has been to put everything she can on the record, name what she can responsibly name, and let the public weigh it. And maybe that is the real reason the silence around Antarctica keeps cracking, one testimony at a time. Not because anyone has produced final proof, but because the people who were there are running out of time to speak, and one journalist spent half a century making sure that when they finally did, someone was listening. The deep ice is still down there, holding whatever it holds. The restricted areas are still restricted, and the witnesses who never came forward are still out there somewhere, growing older, weighing the same choice Brian once weighed at his keyboard on a quiet January morning. If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. So, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the archive of stories like this one runs deeper than the ice itself. And before you go, answer this in the comments. If you had been on that flight deck, staring down at something that was not supposed to exist, would you have signed the papers and stayed silent for 20 years? Or would you have talked whatever it cost you? Be honest. We will be reading every answer. Until next time.